everyone, and welcome to Alpine Intel's The Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss the property loss topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Senior Account Manager Chris Nichols. Now, insurance professionals across the country turn to Alpine Intel for property assessments and innovation through our operating brands, which you may be familiar with. But if not, they are HVACI, Strike Check, National Fire Experts, Donan Engineering, the component testing laboratories, and VRC investigations. Our expert teams provide high quality solutions to a variety of property loss questions. It must be noted that each claim obviously is unique. And on this podcast, we can't cover everything adjusters or experts might see. We're talking in general investigation and insurance terms and for additional, and I should say for informational purposes only. That's why it's very important to get your own assessment to make sure you have all the facts for your claims that you need. So today I am very excited to welcome Jay Dykstra back to the podcast. He's a veteran of the Savvy Adjuster podcast to answer some questions we often get about smoke and fire damage to HVAC equipment. Our listeners who didn't attend our recent live webinar on the topic, or heck, if you just want to hear it again, can learn more about that by following the link that's going to be in our show notes. It's a great summary of some of the more technical aspects of how smoke and fire can impact this type of equipment. But Jay, before we dive into what adjusters should be concerned about regarding smoke and fire claims to HVAC equipment, I would love if you wouldn't mind just summarizing kind of your experience with Alpine Intel and how you have so much knowledge about this topic.
Sure, absolutely. So let's go back before Alpine Intel, as a matter of fact, Chris. I was a field adjuster. So I was in the field handling residential claims, commercial claims, even traveling on catastrophe duty as needed once in a while. So I did that for many years and saw lots of different types of claims. I know we're going to be talking about smoke and fire today. But after that, I moved into the training department for a top 10 carrier where I handled that role for about 7 years. So very involved with helping adjusters, become trained to handle all types of claims, including smoke and fire. And then I've been with Alpine Intel for about the last 5.5 years now, as working on these technical topics and technical trainings and things like that. We've built a catalog of over 25, me personally, 25 training programs. And as you mentioned, we just had that great one on the smoke and fire we had as our open webinar. And I'm looking forward to carrying on that conversation even further today on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for joining us. It sounds like we are, and our listeners are in very good hands today. So my first question, and this is more curiosity on my end, but we know about the damage that traditional fires can cause. And when I say traditional, I mean the ones that are physically, say, within a dwelling. But I'm kind of curious that even if, distant fires such as wildfires or maybe just an intense structural fire can also affect ductwork or other HVAC components.
Certainly possible. So you got to be careful on those. You might get some misrepresented claims on that. So you definitely want to take that step by step. So if we're talking about wildfire in general, normally that's going to affect outside equipment, right? The smoke is coming physically from somewhere else. And so unless the structure is like right as part of the wildfire, but not actually burned down, you might get smoke inside the structure, I guess. But generally with wildfire, it's the equipment that's outside. So we're really talking about, on a split system, we're really talking about the condenser, right? That's the part that could get affected by the smoke that's in the air. So it's possible residences have package units, not as common, but that's possible. So it could be in some of that equipment as well. But now when we're talking commercial claims, if we're just touch on that a little bit, all these buildings that have equipment up on the top of the roofs and stuff, one, they could still be condensers. They could be package units, but they also could be package units with economizers. And economizers actually are part of a package unit that pull in outside air. So if you have smoke in that air, you're now introducing that air into the building. But we could also have makeup air units and things like that they're designed to bring outside air into the building to help with the HVAC process. That's going to be significantly more challenging when you're bringing it inside. But for your standard wildfire claim, you're going to be just dealing with that outside equipment. And then the challenge becomes is, was I close to the fire being the claim, right? Is the equipment close to the fire? Is it in the neighborhood or in the area, or is it 2 states away? Because we know that's going to happen. There is wildfires going on as we speak in California. I'm in New England, and I heard on the news this morning there's going to be wildfire smoke going above us, right? I wouldn't be surprised if we get some claims somewhere in the Midwest that says, hey, all these California wildfires are affecting my equipment. I would definitely get some help with those. That's probably not as likely. But yeah, let me take that the next step where you also asked about other structural fires and things like that. So that definitely can happen. If you could have a big industrial fire, you could even have a house fire in a neighborhood, depending on how much smoke, where it went, and if it didn't go up, but it kind of went out, and things like that. That outdoor equipment can certainly get affected by that. Depends if windows are open or if you have any of that other equipment where the smoke actually got inside. But I think with exterior fires, wildfires, distant fires, it's usually the outside equipment we're going to be looking at for possible damages. Not even probable, but possible damages.
Yeah, and I said it was a curiosity question on my part, mainly because of the wildfires that are going on. I was just kind of curious about that remote smoke affecting units. But with where I live here in Milwaukee, our houses are right on top of each other. I can almost high five both of my neighbors out of both of my windows. And so
Right.
just kind of curiosity of, hey, if they have a structural fire at their house, would it have an opportunity to damage my equipment as well? And you made some good points about residential, mostly outside equipment, but commercial, they've got everything up on the roof, and it
Right.
could
So
affect
before you
that.
go on, I'll address something that we have seen on claims. In fact, I use it as one of my claim scenarios in a past training is houses close together. One house has the house fire, an extreme house fire. The extreme heat from the fire can actually damage equipment. Now, we're not even talking about smoke here. It was so hot of a fire, it can damage the coils. It can damage the physical case. Some of these condensers have plastic equipment on them for crazy reasons. I don't know. And the refrigerant itself. If you have your line set that's carrying that refrigerant in it, if it's exposed to extreme heat, it can actually damage the refrigerant and make it where it's contaminated, and then that can go through the whole system and create a whole other issues. So you could have damage in your home from a house fire from next door due to extreme heat. That's something else that I don't think a lot of adjusters would have realized.
Nor would I have realized. I assumed it would just be from the smoke of the actual fire, but you're right. Those house fires, I'm imagining, and knock on wood, haven't had to deal with one, emit
Right.
some pretty intense temperatures. So just physical
Yeah.
damage to units makes sense as well. So okay, well, good. Well, that's interesting. So. Kind of moving on to different types of smoke, and this is another question I was thinking about: is it possible to mistake, say, damage from heavy tobacco use within a house for smoke damage from a fire versus from an actual fire? Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. And I've had one that's similar. It wasn't actually tobacco smoke, but I'll get to that in I'll touch on that a little bit here as I finish this one up. But there are other things that can cause smoke: tobacco use, burning a lot of candles. And the one I actually had was fireplaces not venting well. They didn't have a good draft, so every time they had a fire in their fireplace, a little bit of smoke, just a little bit got out. Right, not enough that they even really realized it. And then at some point later, right? Could be days, months, weeks, years, decades later, somebody realizes like, man, why is everything dirty in here? Why are the curtains dirty? Things like that. So to differentiate that as an adjuster, you just need to use some common sense in a lot of this, right? So if you think they're making a claim for smoke or fire damage, right? And then I think we're specifically talking about smoke at this time, was there a fire event? Right? If you can't identify a fire event, whether it's a wildfire, a neighbor's fire, or a fire in the home that they've had, where did we get the smoke? Right? So you got to start asking more questions like, do you have a fireplace? Do you burn a lot of candles? Has it traditionally been a lot of tobacco use in the house and things like that? Most of those are going to be things that have happened over an extended period of times, weeks, months, years, decades, right? And traditionally, in most insurance policies, and I know we're not going to get into the policy side of things, but as a past adjuster, is if it wasn't, and the term out there is sudden and accidental from an event, it's probably not covered, right? So as an adjuster, you do have to be able to take some of the time to look, ask more questions, put two and two together. Was there a fire event that could have led to the smoke and things like that? So I think, yeah, it could be mistaken if you just walk in and say, yeah, look at all this smoke. You kind of need to know where the smoke came from, right?
Sure.
So ask more questions, and obviously you can always get some help as well if needed.
Yeah, and you kind of led into another question, and it sounds like, well, as far as the type of damages causes, when an adjuster is going to a claim site to do their initial inspection evaluation, uh, you may have answered it already, but does the type of smoke matter? You mentioned a couple types of smoke, right? Just tobacco use, candles, fireplace, or just does the general damage or the sheer amount of smoke is really what they're looking for?
So it actually can. So obviously the amount of smoke matters. What surface or fabric is the smoke on? That that can make a difference as well. And there are different types of smoke. I mean, you could use some generic terms like dry smoke. Like if you're burning wood or wildfire smoke, I kind of, and I don't know if that's an official term by fire departments or anything like that, but more of a dry smoke. But then you could have an oily smoke. I mean, is it something from an oil fire? Is it something we're gonna maybe touch on puffbacks in our take 10 later, but that's coming from a system that's burning oil. And an oily smoke is going to be completely different. It's going to be slimy. It's going to stick to things differently. It's much harder to clean. Then we have things like a protein fire. Somebody's cooking a big thing of grease in their kitchen because they want to deep fry something, and then they've had a fire. That produces a different kind of smoke, right? That one also has a very hard odor to it that's very hard to get out of things. So when you get into these claims, we're not going to be talking about that as far as our services, but the odors from some of these different types of smokes are harder to deal with and harder to clean and get rid of and things like that. So yes, there are different types of smoke. There are different types of claims related to this, and there's different procedures and levels of things you have to do to remedy it and bring the person back to pre-loss condition.
And we're not going to cover this, but it just popped into my head. I wonder the statistics with Thanksgiving around the corner of deep fried turkey incidences and what how many claims per year
The
those generate. That's probably
the
a
the,
pretty
the statistics are out there, and home fires, specifically cooking fires, are always the highest around holidays. I think
sure.
Thanksgiving's one of the high ones, and Christmas is one of the high ones, and Easter, and the places when people are getting together and cooking big meals, and those deep fried turkeys are definitely one of them. So be
Yeah.
careful.
Distinct smell, delicious smell, but I'm sure very distinct as well.
Absolutely.
So, so let's flash forward to you're determining you do have equipment that was clearly damaged by a fire, right? This next question is kind of maybe more so a first steps for an adjuster, right? Kind of a checklist of what other information should an adjuster get or need before they just settle the claim outright.
Again, what kind of fire was it? Right? Where is it going and things like that? And then what is damaged? And we're going to talk in our lane, right? As far as what we help with, but fire is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a scary claim to handle, especially if you're a newer adjuster, maybe one of your first ones you get, because the scope can be huge, right? Whether it's structural damage and painting and flooring and cabinets and all that sort of stuff. But as far as this equipment goes, um, you have many things to identify, and a lot of it, the adjuster has their hands tied, right? They can't look inside the ductwork. Is there damage or is there smoke in the ductwork? I mean, you can't really see in the ductwork. So you're going to have to get some help. And whether that's opening the ductwork, taking some of it apart by a trained technician, is that one of the newer companies out there that has cameras? They actually put cameras into these ductwork systems and can help identify damages and things like that. But the same goes for the equipment, whether it's outdoor equipment, we talked about condensers, or whether it's indoor equipment, whether that's an air handler or a furnace. Again, they're sealed piece of equipment. There could be smoke on the outside of them you could identify, right? But a lot of them, the smoke's on the inside of them. and there's some sensitive components in there. There's blower wheels, and there's control boards, and there's electric wires, and all that sort of stuff. Somebody that you trust is going to have to open that up and identify if it's there and damaged. Was it from this sudden and accidental event? And then what are we going to do? Is it cleanable? Or are we going to have to replace this equipment because of the level of damage, or it's not cleanable, the type of smoke we talked about, and things like that? So it's a challenge. So, and you could take it a whole step further. If we talk about open up the equipment, what about the ductwork? What kind of ductwork is it? Right, that matters, and we touch on that in our training, in our webinar we just did. Is the type of ducts matter? What's it made out of? Is it a flex duct, or is it a rigid fiber board, and things like that? Is it a metal duct, and is there insulation around the duct that's full of the smoke, and things like that? So it goes on and on and on, and you need to be a pretty seasoned or pretty savvy adjuster, maybe with some experience or things like that, to identify all these things. And guess what? Ducks aren't in easy places. They're, even on the outsides of them, they're not in easy places to investigate. They're in the basement. They're in the crawl space. They're in the attic. All the places you don't really want to go, or they're hard to get to, and things like that. So the claims, just the challenges stack on top of each other when it comes to a smoke and fire claim.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned even the most, not, no pun intended, the most savvy adjuster may need to lean on a third party vendor. And that's obviously where people like national fire experts or even HVACI can come in and lend their expertise to kind of give them some more pieces to the puzzle to try to put that all together. So
Absolutely.
we were talking about ductwork just now, and it seems like, again, I am a novice in this field, but it seems like smoke and fire would be present in the ductwork. And if it was sucked into the system, you mentioned some ways adjusters can do this, but how would experts go about identifying whether it's there, and really to what extent it's kind of weaving through that ductwork?
Yeah, so that's a good one. And we should probably just identify too, or just point out, to be fire is pretty, or I shouldn't say pretty easy. That's kind of a too loose of a term. It's going to be something with physical identifiable damage, right? If something's burned, you almost always can see it, right? So that's one thing. So I like to say, just in my generic terms and as an adjuster, fire is kind of a no-brainer. You usually can see it, and then a lot of times it causes a lot of damage. And so that's not as hard. You still have to know what the repair methodology is and the pricing. So that's another challenge. Smoke now is the much more challenging one. Is it gets in places you don't know where it is. It's harder to look at. You don't know what type it is, and things like that. So with smoke, it might take a different kind of expert to help you out, right? So as far as when I'm talking about cleaning, right, there's some technicians that can identify damage, help with how big the scope is. But if you actually have to clean all your ducts, that's usually a specialty company, right? It's usually a technician doesn't usually, maybe small areas, maybe they clean the inside of the unit. But if you're cleaning expansive ductwork systems in some of these homes, you're going to have some company that comes out that have specialty equipment. They're opening it up. They're physically running brushes in and out of them. They have giant vacuum systems to pull out debris. They have equipment, and these mitigation companies have equipment, things called like Vapor Shark, and these things that actually help take the odors out. When odors get into the equipment and things like that. So it can be very challenging to look at all this stuff. Some people don't realize it either too, and especially like a furnace cabinet a lot of times has insulation between the equipment and the inside, and the outside case, there's actually insulation to help make it more effective and efficient. If that insulation gets filled with smoke, you're in real trouble, right? You're not going to even though you might be able to physically dismantle the whole thing and put it into it, it's probably not cost effective. But how do you know that? How do you know if it's in there? How do you know, where that is? Some of them have it, some of them don't. Again, adjusters don't have x-ray visions. They're not technicians. They're not opening up these things and looking at them. So you're definitely going to want someone you trust that can get in there and help make some of these decisions. And smoke is both physical on it, but it's also about the odor as well. So Sometimes you think it's clean, but if you still smell it, that's still that house needs more help to get it back to
Sure.
pre-loss.
Well, and I was going to ask also, sometimes if equipment is damaged, say your outside unit was totally damaged, you have that replaced, you fire up your system again in your house, and now, I mean, have you seen claims in your experience where somebody has to go back out for the ductwork because, well, the unit wasn't running for a long time, and then it all of a sudden starts pushing fresh air through there, and now you kind of notice that smoke damage, the smell. Is that seen often?
I wouldn't, I don't know. I haven't seen it often. I have seen it for sure. And we've seen big claims where you had a big fire or whatever, and maybe an attic fire, the top stories are damaged and things like that. But a lot of the ductwork's either in the walls or in the basement. And in fact, we had one of our claim scenarios in a past training as well that I'm remembering off the top of my head, where that was the exact same thing. They did all the other work, and then it was like a supplement where they came back and are like, oh, we forgot. We need to do all the duct work. They wanted to replace it all. They actually got help with that one. I think HVACI went out and looked at it and said, no, we can still clean this, even though it's been a while and everything else. But it was definitely an afterthought. And it definitely happened after everything else happened. They wanted to replace everything, but it wasn't physically damaged by fire. It was cleanable. That's probably what the policy owned in that case, to bring it back to pre-loss condition, and that's what HVACI recommended in that case. So, yeah, it certainly can happen, and it doesn't happen just with smoke and fire either. A lot of times, other things happen with claims that come back around, or you have to do a supplement or something like that. But smoke's
Sure.
definitely one of them that could be high on the list of things that could happen with, for sure.
So we've been talking a lot about the cleaning portion of that, which is the best case scenario, right? Being able to clean it versus replacing all of the ductwork in a not only a residential but a commercial location as well. What is the tipping point between that clean and then kind of full replacement? Are there indicators that would lean somebody towards replacing all the ductwork versus being able to clean it?
Yeah, so most of it is, well, like most claims, most of it's going to be cost versus cost analysis, repair versus replace. They get to be the same thing, you're probably going to replace it, right? But there's also just the consideration of what type of duct it is. I talked about it a little bit earlier. I'll touch on it again here. Is there are certain types of ducts that just aren't worth cleaning, right? We have rigid fiberboard that actually has rough, basically fiberglass on the inside. You can imagine just raw fiberglass, right? Like bad insulation. If it gets wet, if it gets smoky, it gets dirty, mildew in it, things like that, that's going to be a real problem. You have to replace it all. Flex ducts, which a lot of homes have, they're easy to install. They come in long runs. They're easier. They're more cost effective, I should say. I already said easy to install. Those, even though they may be cleanable, it's not cost effective to do it. So you're going to be replacing all the flex ducts usually that are involved in things like that. So now, if you have what I call rigid ducts, whether they're rectangular, square, round, metal, that can be cleaned, you're probably always going to go there first. You're going to clean it first, and then you're going to make a decision whether anything else has to be replaced. So now, if you're getting into the equipment, I know we're talking about ducts, but if you get into the equipment, that's a little bit more challenging to do. Like in a furnace is, how much smoke was in there? What is it on the evaporator coil? Is it on the control boards? Is it in that insulation I mentioned? And things like that. You're definitely going to want to get some help with that. And then the pricing of it. Like, well, what's it going to cost to clean it? What's it going to cost to replace it, and get that pricing right as well? So, challenge after challenge with these types of claims for sure, as for the adjusters.
Well, and again, to circle back around, it's nice to have third-party vendors like HVACI that can lend that professional knowledge to determine repairability versus, a full replacement, which is always nice. So, um, so what happens when a policyholder has, say, a local contractor who says they have to replace the system because of, you hear a lot about current refrigerants, for example, R22, R410A, which have been or are very close to being phased out. What happens again when a policyholder says, "Hey, my contractor says they have to replace the whole system because of phasing out of current refrigerants."
Yeah, that's a real challenging one. That's a very big topic. We've been in this cycle forever, right? I've been many moons for me since I handled claims, and we were talking about this back then, decades ago. That was mostly with the R22 transition when we went to that being quote unquote phased out and illegal, even though you can still kind of use, not kind of, you can still use reclaimed R22 legally. But now, hopefully, everybody out there or the people that are adjusters that are watching know that R410A is now being phased out as well. And so it's going to be a phase out process. They're calling it phase down, but we know what that means, right? So eventually it's going to be going away over time. But here's the more challenging thing with that, and I'm going to leave some of this, but just high level is there's going to be the part of the AIM Act, which is the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, that's kind of taken this up for the EPA. And it's stating things like, and I'll just give you a quick bullet, is no more production of R410A equipment starting in January of 2025. Here we are shooting our podcast or talking about this, our podcast in September of 2024. We're only a few months away from that. And both the industry, the insurance industry, and the adjusters better be paying attention. And a lot of people are going to be scrambling when this all starts coming in as claims in 2025, because there's going to be some real effect there. It's going to be kind of that same transition from R22 to R410A. We're going to be going from R410A to something else, which is, you know, a couple refrigerants are coming to the top there. There's going to be lots of changes there. There's going to be lots of similarities to R22. There's going to be lots of new intricacies with that as well. So stay tuned. We're going to be doing more, talking more about this coming up. But the challenges are already always there. So to answer your, that was a long answer to a short question, is what do they do, right? You're going to have to get some help, right? Because if they just say point blank, you have to replace it all, that's not always true. So all that stuff I just said about making it challenging, repair should always still be in the mindset. There's still lots of opportunity to repair. You can still repair R22 systems. You're still going to be able to repair R410A systems and things like that. Almost never does it come to the fact where it's like you have to replace it every time something happens to it. And we know adjusters hear that all the time out there. So
Sure.
still think repair, still get that help if you need it. And then you have to get the pricing right on that repair as well.
And so just to really encapsulate that or just reiterate, no new equipment for R410A will be manufactured in 2025, but that's not to say there isn't a stockpile of old equipment that can be used to do repairs. Am I getting that correct?
Partially.
Okay.
So repairs are possible, and they're going to make parts for repairs, but the systems, they're going to have 1 year to sell through of anything, like a whole system that's sitting on a shelf. They're going to have 1 year to sell through that. So after that, when I say repairs, you might be able to get a condenser. You might be able to get a coil. You might be able to get a fan. You're not going to be able to get a new system and call that a repair, right? So, and a lot of that's not even totally spelled out on how that's going to work. It's written down of what you can and can't do, but until they actually start doing it and things start getting becoming real in the claim world, we're going to have to see how all that plays out. But still think repair versus replace. Nobody's going to have to go out and replace a system because it has a refrigerant that's been banned or phased out, like R22, R410A. You can keep it for its life. And as the regulation reads right now, repairable indefinitely, right? So if it can be repaired, it should be repaired, at least under an insurance contract. So.
Sure. Interesting stuff. Yeah, I feel like that's all I've been talking about with the adjusters that I call is reiterating the R22 and R410A phase out and just educating them on what they need to be on the lookout for, and again to lean on a partner that can help them out and determine repairability versus replacement. So great to have that knowledge, not only in the podcast, but I know our education team is happy to do any sort of education for teams out there to kind of go over those changes, those upcoming changes as well, to make sure insurance company staffs are well prepared for those changes at the beginning of the year as well. So a lot of resources here. So I always like to kind of end these podcasts with, we've gotten a lot of facts and things like that, but I like kind of real life examples, if you will. So I know you have a pretty vast experience with claims adjusting, and you've seen a ton of claims. Can you think of any off the top of your head, or maybe some examples that we've used in our webinars of fire claims with HVAC units, that kind of stand out or that would be interesting for the listener to kind of hear a little bit more about?
Absolutely. So yeah, we work in this realm every day, right? And I can lean back on some of my adjusting things here in a little bit. But let's start with a couple case studies that we've done here at HVACI, and a couple that I kind of, I knew we were coming on today, and I was thinking about them, and maybe one residential and one commercial. But one of the case studies that we have published out there. Um, the adjuster gets this quote or an estimate or invoice or whatever from the insurance contractor. It says, we need to replace this whole part of the system for $5,000, and because of smoke, right? So it turns out the adjuster's like, that just doesn't sound right. So they engaged HVACI, they got some help, and lo and behold, it turned out that it did not need to be replaced. It was actually very, very light smoke, just a little bit in the filter, and hardly any inside the furnace, but enough to say we should probably address it. It is part of a claim. There is some there. They did have a fire event. I think it was a garage fire, actually. And we wrote an estimate to clean it for like $250. So that's $4,750 that could have been overpaid, whatever you like to call it out there as an adjuster. It could be indemnity, leakage, or things like that. It's really not, it's not accurate. So, we call it accuracy. So there was $4,750 of accuracy there that could have been very easily been paid out just to make that claim go away, because the adjuster trusted that estimate that got sent to them to, because there was a real garage fire. Could have been easy just to lump that all together, right? So it's like, oh, $5,000. I got like a $50,000 claim over from fire. Throw another $5,000 in there's, big deal. Don't do that, right? Slow down, take your time, and things like that. So that's a residential one. A commercial one that I was looking at had two small split systems for this small business, and they were claiming there was an electrical fire. So there was a very small event, but not a big event. But they now, again, things commercial generally are exponential on one, just size of equipment and things like that, but also price, right? So they're requesting over $18,600 to replace both systems. They really had no damage at all. The filters were clean. They were running fine. We couldn't identify anything but like kind of maintenance related stuff. Like might have looked like a little bit of smoke inside the unit. Might have looked like a little bit of smoke on the blower wheel. There was no odor to it. It turned out it was dirt, right? It was just not maintained well. So they wanted $18,600 to replace both systems, and it was a wear and tear issue. So those are the ones that adjusters don't want to get caught on the wrong side of, right? They want to make sure they get that one right. It's a bad day if you accidentally pay $18,000 on a claim that's really not even covered, not even covered. So that's certainly an issue for sure. So me personally, I had some fire claims, and again, HVAC equipment, maybe not the biggest part of the overall fire claim, kitchen fires, things like that. But the ones, I'm in New England, so the ones that were a super challenge to me were puffbacks. Some of you on here that are listening or watching might not even know what that is, but it's a certain type of equipment that's, like a boiler or a furnace that's burning oil. And yes, someplace in the country, they actually use oil as their fuel, not natural gas or propane, but actual oil. It's really bad when something goes wrong with that and you get that oily smoke throughout your home. So those are the ones that were really hard. If there's adjusters on here that handle claims in areas that have that, if I say the word puffback, they probably have PTSD, right? We're coming up on the winter season. I know whenever I got a puffback claim, I would just cringe because I knew how challenging that claim was going to be. So come back and visit our Take 10 episode of this, and we're going to go a little bit further into what they are, how they happen, how you deal with them, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't spill the beans too much on the puffback because, yeah, it's going to be a really interesting Take 10 episode that our listeners can also check out as well. And those two examples, I mean, while impressive by themselves, right? $18,000 worth of leakage, 4750. I'm just thinking that's one example, but the size of a carrier that's doing thousands of claims per year and how many, you kind of start multiplying those by 10, 20, 100, 1,000. Those are real dollars that add up. So again,
Absolutely.
it's nice to have a third party, a kind of unbiased company like HVACI to go out and give a second set of eyes, if you will, on that. So, um,
Yep, for sure.
well, awesome stuff, Jay. We have reached our end of our time here, and I just again wanted to thank you for joining us here on the Savvy Adjuster podcast. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, I had a few takeaways that's going to help those adjusters out there with these challenging claims.
No, absolutely. I personally always get a lot out of your insight, not only here, but obviously during the webinars that you host. So again, thank you for being here. And again, speaking of our webinars, the HVAC smoke and fire claims webinar is linked in our show notes along with some additional smoke and fire material. So make sure to check that out. You can also always go to our website, which is alpineintel.com. We have a resource page there for past webinar recordings on a variety of property loss topics, not just smoke and fire claims. Or if you want to get signed up for future webinars that we have, you can do that there as well. And it goes without saying, thanks to everyone for listening today. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And finally, if you have any property claims that do need assessments, you can always submit an assignment on our website, again, alpineintel.com, or simply just get more details about how our suite of services can bring you the answers you need to feel confident about your settlement decisions. Thank you again for joining, everybody, and we will see you next time.